Hello and welcome to The Audible, presented by Trader Joe's. I'm Ralph Russo from The Athletic, joined today by my colleague Bruce Feldman. Stuart Mandel's on assignment. The hat is back. I'm really struggling with trying to get a haircut, folks. I'm just going to be real about this. Been a little too busy for the haircut. We've got a lot to cover. Even though we've been rapid firing shows, the news never stops. We're going to do a mailbag later on. There is, of course, more coaching news. There is, of course, more Lane Kiffin news. Bruce, let's start with the coaching carousel continuing to spin. Not necessarily shocking news, but it all came together. In fact, I think it should become official as we're recording here. But it all sort of came together this afternoon. The headliner at K-State, where Chris Klieman is stepping down. Talk about retirement there, and maybe even more interesting, the replacement already is kind of lined up.
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like we were talking about this offline, maybe in the last 48 hours, about there were rumblings, and you get that, where whether it was going to be rumblings at Iowa or rumblings at Utah with very established coaches who are further along in their career. Maybe this is it for them in terms of being on the sideline. So we started hearing a lot more about Chris Klieman perhaps stepping down. And as soon as there was a report from an account, I'll be honest, I don't follow. It's the Mercury. It's a local paper there. Good job on them. They scooped everybody on this. I saw it. It was one of the first things I saw when I woke up. And then I saw our friend Billy Lucci, who's all over Texas A&M's beat for a long time. He had confirmed it because Colin Klein, former, Heisman finalist, a legendary quarterback at K-State, done a really good job as the Aggies offense coordinator, that he was going to, in fact, go on back home to his school. And it's not shocking, as you said, because again, Colin Klein was in line for some similar level jobs, given the work he had done. And again, I go back to that soundbite we had after the game against, I believe it was Utah, where he was Chris just seemed to exacerbate it. It was very different from how we've seen Chris Klieman before. And so we're going to hear more about maybe some of the circumstances, perhaps, that are also factoring into this. He had a terrific run, came from North Dakota State. And one thing I always go back to, and not to harp on this too much, but I was a sideline reporter doing a lot of Big 12 games for a while. And a lot of coaches in that conference would always say the best coach team in the Big 12 was K-State. And they make great adjustments, and they're so well prepared. Now, some of those assistants, not just Colin Klein, but his old line coach, Connor Riley, who's done a terrific job. He's now in the NFL with the Cowboys. I think sometimes it's hard to sustain it when you lose really good assistants and replacing it all. But Ralph, I know we all have a lot of respect for the job he did there. How do you think this plays going forward?
Yeah, I think you're right. He did a good job there. We talked about previously how there was some frustration over the last couple of years because they were expected to be a Big 12 contender in the new Big 12. In the last 2 years, they fell out of it and they weren't in the playoff race. And, we talk about the Big 12 being super volatile and, you're an injury here, an injury there, a couple of kicks and a fumble away from being 9-3 as opposed to 6-6. That Utah game was a good example, right? Like they had this big lead and they let it get away, but the margins are thin in that conference. Again, what led to this in terms of behind the scenes, maybe we'll get a better detail, maybe we won't. The Colin Klein piece is very interesting. In talking with some sources this morning, I think that there was a real concerted effort being made to make it understood that Colin Klein was not pushing Chris Klieman out, right? I just got the sense in talking to people that the idea that they sort of have their replacement all lined up makes it seem like it could be a little nefarious. And I think that there were some efforts being made behind the scenes to sort of say, listen, Chris Klieman was making his decision independent of what the decision Colin Klein was going to make. It also is notable, as you said, Colin Klein's name came up for the Oklahoma State job. Colin Klein's name came up for the USF job. that job we'll talk about, was filled by Brian Hartline, the receiver, great receiver coach, but also the OC now at Ohio State. So whatever, Chris Klieman did a good job, and it seems like Colin Klein is the perfect replacement to go back to Manhattan and be the next head coach of Kansas State, even if the end for Chris Klieman was not perfect. Let's put it that way, right, Bruce?
Yeah, and I think what will be interesting here, and knowing from talking to people inside the Big 12 a lot this year, dating back to the summer, it felt like a largely level playing field in the Big 12, unlike when maybe Texas and Oklahoma are in there, where you had two blue bloods and everybody else was kind of on the same plane. And K-State was doing well, and all of a sudden a blue blood emerged in how they spend, and that's in Lubbock, in Texas Tech. And I don't think I don't think it was coincidental. Like, that was a different deal. That was a different animal for everybody else. I'm not saying that was factored into this at all, that all of a sudden now, Texas Tech recruits and operates like a top 10 program would. But it will be interesting because, as we said, Colin Klein now has been at a program that has a lot of money in Texas A&M. He sees how they operate. Now you have a star player, like one of the best quarterbacks probably they've ever had there, comes home. Does that bring in resources that maybe get people off the sideline who weren't engaged? I don't know the answer. We'll find out. But that will be interesting to see, can they, because the bar is pretty high in Manhattan, Kansas. Like we've gotten used to them being a consistent top 25 kind of program. Obviously Bill Snyder worked miracles there, and then Klieman did a really good job. So fascinated to see how this goes forward, not just with Colin, but also, how the community leans into it if they do.
I'm just going to kick this one right back to you, and that is Brian Hartline at USF. That's a good job. It can be. It's not the easiest. It's not a plug and play. You just step in and it moves itself. They're commandeering a lot of resources for an on-campus stadium, so things are moving there. And Alex Golish did a good job of reestablishing some things behind the scenes. They seem to be very aligned in terms of we want to follow the UCF path and become a power conference program there. It would seem to be a good place for a first-time head coach like Brian Hartline.
Yeah, dogged recruiter. He's the one who got Jeremiah Smith out of Miami,
especially in that part of the country, right? Yeah,
yeah, and so he's got a lot of juice. There were some other jobs that I know he had some intrigue in the past and recent, whether it was West Virginia. I think Kentucky was interesting. It'll be interesting to see how this plays out in terms of, I'm not saying he would have taken Kentucky over USF if it could have gone that way. They obviously hired Will Stein, who is from the state of Kentucky, and his parents, went to Kentucky there, even though he was a Louisville quarterback. We know I don't want to say like which coach turns out to have the better coaching career 10 years from now. That we should say that in case people are curious, Brian Hartline, as we were reporting earlier, is going to stay at Ohio State throughout the CFP, as if that needed to be further underscored. But I'm interested to see how he does, because he's never been a head coach. He's been as good of a position coach as there is in college football over the last 7 or 8 years. He has recruited at the highest level, and he has developed at the highest level. You just need to turn on an NFL game and you see these dudes, much less what you see what's still in Columbus. So now he's back in Florida. He was a guy who played for the Dolphins. He's obviously recruited a lot there. Very curious to see how it goes. There's no reason to think, we talked about North Texas a little bit the other day. There's no reason to think USF cannot be the best program given the recruiting pool it has. Right. And now you have a big name assistant coach with a big pedigree. No reason to think this cannot become the powerhouse of the American Conference. At least that's where I sit on it.
Yeah, it speaks to this idea, Bruce, of like, and this is bigger than Brian Hartline, right? Like, these coaches understand, hey, I'm in a good position here. When my stock is high, it's not just about getting the head coaching job. It's about getting the head coaching job that either is a really big job, right? Or positions me to get what my next job is, right? And that's not, I don't want to crap on USF, but if Brian Hartline does well there, just like Alex Golish, in 3 years, he will probably be a Big Ten coach or an SEC coach or a Big 12 coach. That seems like a job that should be able to be a springboard. And you shouldn't necessarily lament that if you're USF. You should lean into that and say, that means we're going to get the best guys. And I think the question about a guy like Hartline is less of recruiting, development, even play calling, because he did that this year, though I'm sure Ryan Day still has a hand in that.
Yeah.
But he was the primary play caller this year, and the offense certainly looked pretty good at Ohio State. I think it becomes more of face of the program, managing the program, being the CEO. And that's always the case with all the coordinators, even to a certain degree with head coaches from G5 schools moving up to Power 5 schools, Power 6, Power 4, whatever, schools. There's a little bit of that, hey, how do you manage all this? And that becomes the question about whether you're good enough or whether you adapt and whether you can grow into the position as much as like your ability to recruit does. Yeah, and we should also mention Colin Klein also is expected to stay with Texas A&M throughout the playoff. Hey, actually, we're going to pivot to more Lane, but just because it's related here, we found out yesterday, and this was something we didn't cover with Stu and I after the ranking show, Charlie Weiss Jr. is also going to stay with Ole Miss and call plays through their playoff run. There was some question about that when he moved down with the intention of him eventually landing at LSU with Lane. Yeah, when he got on the plane. So that's something that sort of pivoted. So let's take a break here because we want to get into a little more.
Before we do
Lane.
that, I want to add, before we do that, I want to get in one other thing. Okay. So as we're talking about the American, one other coaching thing that I think happened in between, which was Neal Brown, former West Virginia coach, Troy coach. He took the North Texas job. He was also in on a couple other jobs. Neal Brown did a phenomenal job at Troy, did a decent job at West Virginia. I'm not sure it was the greatest fit there in Morgantown, but he's a super smart guy. The West Virginia
thing got weird too. Like that was a school that he took over right around the pandemic and some things shifted around leadership and funding and stuff there around that time. So I think it was one of the, I don't want to make excuses for the guy. I think there was a situation where he never really got traction.
No, and he was on the hot seat for a while. Then he had a 9-win season where they finished in top 25, got a little more time. And then it was like, you could tell they just did not want Neal Brown. You know, he's a good coach. He's super smart. He spent the last year with Sark basically as a special assistant to the head coach. But in addition, I want to bring up North Texas obviously its profile is elevated significantly. I'm not saying it's SMU or certainly TCU, but huge season for Eric Morris. They still may make the playoff. It's a good recruiting base. We have that school. We certainly have Tulane, which is open. We have Memphis, which is still open. And now we have USF that's been filled. Of those, I feel like USF has the biggest ceiling. That's what I think. I feel like Hartline has taken the biggest job. I get why North Texas, a lot of coaches I know really like that job. Memphis has had a dozen years of consistent winning. Tulane has had 4 years of really good success. Which of those jobs, if I ask you to rank them in terms of how big the jobs are, give me off the top of your hat 1, 2, 3, 4 of them.
So it's hard. I think it's USF is a little like a drug. They are tempting, right? I think we fall for them a lot, but we finally are seeing a little bit of that ceiling. But we still, I do think there still is a little bit of like, well, let's see what happens when there's a stadium as opposed to having to play in the NFL stadium. And there has been so much volatility there. So it's alluring to put USF there because I think it is the highest ceiling of those jobs. But the track record says Memphis. Now, nobody has managed to Well, I shouldn't say nobody. Mike Norvell had some peaks. I do wonder if there's like that Memphis has the highest floor out of those jobs. You've had 3 coaches now that have done a good job. And again, we can complain that, well, maybe they didn't hit their ceiling enough, but the floor is pretty high at Memphis. So I guess what I would be still tempted to say is until I can see the consistently high ceiling being hit, I maybe would go Memphis, USF, Tulane, and North Texas. But I would also say this. I don't know if there's a whole lot of gap between all those. The difference between those jobs might simply be the coach at the time, you know?
Yeah, it's funny. I've been to, I think, all the programs, but at very different times. So it's hard for me to shake the Tommy West going to visit Albert Means in the spring game. And,
and that was ago, Bruce.
It was 25 years ago.
Yeah.
And at some point I remember going to Memphis when, oh my God, who was I want to say it's D'Angelo Russell, but who was the phenomenal running back they had?
D'Angelo Williams.
D'Angelo Williams, yeah. So I'd been around there, but I haven't been there since they really have gone on this run. North Texas, I remember going back there when Ramon Flanagan was the offensive coordinator 25 years ago, and they would have like the nation's leading rusher like back-to-back years, but the facilities were atrocious.
Yeah.
The facilities are not atrocious anymore.
No.
And we're talking about USF. Tulane, similar deal. I was JP Lossman, Pat Ramsey, whatever. And that program's come a long way. I still am going to hold out to be like USF. I think Memphis because of consistency. I think North Texas maybe ahead of Tulane, but maybe not. We'll see. Again, some of that comes down to leadership, I think, too, of who's pulling the trigger. But anyway, fascinating to see how these cards shuffle because, 4 big jobs, 2 of them have been filled. The other 2, I would think, would get filled pretty soon.
Yeah.
We'll see.
All right. We're going to come back in just a moment. And of course, our daily Lane Kiffin segment next. Okay, we're back. And of course, this is the Lane Kiffin, the Daily Lane of it all. So interesting thing happened last night, Bruce. I was, doing rankings and getting ready to do a pod with Stu. And I got a text from someone who forwarded me a tweet. And it just sort of said, like, this is interesting. And I'm obviously not going to reveal my source. The tweet was from the starting center at Ole Miss. And it quote tweeted Lane Kiffin's statement on the way out the door. And I'll let you provide, and it wasn't the only one like that, but it was the first one I saw. And I'll let you provide a little insight on, if people missed it, what that tweet said.
Yeah, and so both of these were in regard to Lane posted on Twitter that the Rebels had asked him to coach them in their college football playoff game.
The players, specifically.
The players had. And, to be honest, this kind of talking point had come up a bunch, I know, on our shows and probably a lot of other places where it was like, well, what do the players think? What do the players think? And so I know that, with Chris Peterson, it was like, yeah, I'm sure that there's a leadership council or the captains have been, asked their thoughts or whatever. But Lane gave his statement in a lengthy statement he posted on Twitter, 48 hours ago. Well, this is what Bryson Sanders, the starting center, posted in response. In quotes, despite the team asking me to keep coaching, and he writes, I think everyone was in that room would disagree, end quote. And he's on the Ole Miss Leadership Council. These are not like the guys involved who pushed back and kind of called Lane out. They're not like fifth team, nobody, don't play in the game. It's the starting center. And the other one who was especially outspoken was Santarum Perkins, who's really one of their best defense players and has been for the last 2 years. And he responded saying, that was not the message you said in the meeting. Everyone that was in there can vouch on this. Right. And then that led to other Lane Kiffin players and former Lane Kiffin players who chimed in. One of them is a former defensive lineman who played for Kiffin in 2020. I think his name is Tariquis Tisdale. He writes, quote, and he posted this on Facebook, "Don't get me started on Lane. He's been a snake since I met him. And I got teammates that can vouch, especially if you was there in 2020, 2021 and played defense." So this is getting ugly. And the thing I would ask you about here, Ralph, is it's 2025. Everybody has a live mic essentially with social media. If you're Lane Kiffin and you didn't say, and this was not the truth, and you posted that it was, given how emotional this all is, you are asking for trouble if it's what these players have all said, to post it and not expect for them to call BS and call you out and make you look like a liar.
Right. I mean, to a degree, I don't know if it matters, right? I mean, I think, and here's what I'll say, Bruce. And I say that because...
Explain yourself on that. Explain why you say that.
What's done is done. He's being celebrated at LSU. I think everything that has happened with Lane, as we have talked about over the last couple of weeks, is reflective of what has happened with Lane over the course of his 20-year career. Like, again, I don't like to personally attack. So I just think that, like, this all seems to fit very well into the portrait, the public portrait of Lane Kiffin. He is now the hero at LSU. I don't think this is going to be a problem for him recruiting players at LSU or whatever, but it does seem to, I do think it's valuable. I don't want to say it doesn't matter. I don't know if it matters to Lane Kiffin. I think it is a fair, I think it is good to a certain degree for Ole Miss to sort of be able to push back against the narrative that has mostly been controlled by Lane, because you have to understand, like, we haven't really heard from Keith Carter. I think a lot of people in positions of power at Ole Miss, frankly, just don't want to get involved at this, right? My sense of this is like, hey man, he left, we're good, we're moving forward. They don't want to get into, can I say piss and match here on this podcast? I just said it. I don't think they want to get into that, but I would imagine there's more than a few people in Oxford that are happy to have the players' voices out there.
Yeah, and I would think, there may be fans out there who don't have a dog in the fight kind of on who's playing on the field. They may not love Ole Miss as a school. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. They're going to probably be inclined to root for these players because of it really looked like they got hosed. And I think that, to use the word of the former defensive lineman who played for him, use the word snake, I think to a degree you're right. I think for the people who think Lane's a snake, now you have more, right, more proof or evidence to feel that way. And if you just think, look, they're football coaches, they're not, their worth is really about how good the teams play on the field, not necessarily whether they're, high men of moral character, right? And this would certainly call into question that. And I think if you're an LSU fan, you just care probably that he's not going to do it to your guys 2 years from now or 3 years from now. If it goes well and then all of a sudden the NFL calls him back
or if it does happen, it's after he's won a national championship, right? Like you can squeeze whatever the value is you can get out of him over the next 4 to 7 years, and and if he does leave you the way he left Ole Miss someday, at least maybe you got a trophy on the case to. And the other thing I would also say is never be under the opinion that that one player speaks for every player, right? I'm sure that there are some guys.
What about 2 or 3 and their leader?
No, without
council.
question. I'm not trying to bail out, but I just think that, like, I wouldn't be shocked if there was at least a couple of within the 120 players on that team who might have a slightly different view. But it is absolutely notable that 2 very prominent players felt comfortable in coming out and saying what they did. So I just think that just to be fair to everybody involved.
Yeah, just from a reporting standpoint, and again, this was something these guys offered on their own. It wasn't like somebody reached out to them.
They were not prompted.
Yeah, I think it's important. Look, we did that Brian Kelly story a year ago, and I think it was important that, we had their starting center on the record talking about Brian Kelly. It wasn't somebody who was like people have never heard of. It wasn't an anonymous thing. I think that adds credibility. These players have all put their names on it.
Right. Super.
And
super
so I think
important.
that's
right. I don't want to diminish what those guys did. I just want to put a little balance there. Hey, it's signing day. This used to be on TV on signing day, right? Like back in when signing day was in February. Didn't you do some signing day shows? I did.
I would be on. I remember there was when I was at CBS, Brian Fisher and I, who's now at SI.com. We did like 18 hours straight. And I remember it was like I could, like, you just were out there constant. I think I did 3 shows for them. And I remember doing a signing day show when I was back in my ESPN days, back when, who was Jadeveon Clowney was big, but there was an offensive lineman who kind of got caught in between Auburn and Alabama. And there was the signing day drama that lasted for like 72 hours.
I feel like every year there was often an offensive lineman, but there was at least one player that did he committed, but he didn't send in his paper, and we would spend, 12 to 14 hours on fax alert. And I do not miss it one small bit. So there are other people who lament the passing of signing day and the pomp and circumstance around it. And I understand.
Is some of that because it's there's 2 prongs to this.
Yeah.
One, I could get it if you are disgusted by the farcical nature of the dog and pony show of the hats. The other piece, which I think is probably a more relevant thing, is that, I go to the Elite 11 every year to watch these quarterbacks. There's 25 kids. 17 of them are probably going to end up playing at a different school than the one they signed with. Right. So it doesn't seem quite as significant.
It's all of it. I am not for a second downplaying, because I don't want to get a text from Ari Wasserman, our old friend. I don't want to diminish the importance of high school recruiting and signing day. Those are still the schools that are most likely to win the national championship, the ones that can load up on signing day with blue chip recruits. It's still important. I don't want to invest that much time. And we have other people who do a great job. Grace Rayner does a great job. Manny Navarro and Antonio Morales.
Antonio Morales has a good story today that you can check out on USC, having the #1 ranked recruiting class. And as we're taping this, we'll see if Chris Henry Jr., who, by the way, was committed to Ohio State, he is an elite receiver in Orange County. He's committed to Ohio State. He could end up at Oregon, maybe even at USC. We'll see which direction that goes. Stick to the Athletic. You will have a story probably out before too long. But Vandy, Ralph.
Yes.
Vandy, a place that you spent a lot of time in over the past
couple
year.
Weeks ago, yeah.
Pulled a real head turner. It's not just they're winning 10 games for the first time ever. What else have they done?
Vanderbilt flipped a Georgia commit quarterback, Jared Curtis, a 5-star, I believe on most rankings, a 5-star. And again, when I complain about signing day, it's mostly just a personal thing. I didn't like it, but I'm glad that we have others who are able to take the cross off of my back. And so I don't have to pay attention to it, but we do a great job at The Athletic of covering it. Jared Curtis, is a kid from Georgia, was committed to Georgia. Vandy flipped him. He is now, he is signed with Vanderbilt. That's a big deal, man. Georgia also flipped a wide receiver who was supposed to be going to Alabama earlier in the day. Now that was a 3-star commit, so maybe not as splashy. When I was at Vanderbilt for the Missouri game a few weeks back, that's when this was gaining momentum. He did his official visit that day. There was a banner hanging from the rafters in the stadium, the new stadium at Vanderbilt, basically, encouraging the flip. We're here for you, Jared, or something along those lines. So huge deal that Vandy landed this kid, because frankly, with Diego Pavia finally moving on, and we can say that is the case, even though there's still some lawsuit stuff that is his name on it be in the pipeline, but he is moving on. Jared Curtis could be their starting quarterback next year. I think that's a real possibility. But if nothing else, it also sort of validates that where Vandy is, could be where they stay, or at least the ballpark of where they stay, Bruce?
Yeah, I mean, it's an amazing turn. I had first heard a lot about him because he actually has the same private quarterback coach that Lenora Sellers does.
Okay.
And it's cool. His story is like, it just sounded like this kid worked and worked, and not to say that other kids don't do this, but was like maybe not the wow kid at a young age, and just kept blossoming and developing. And look, good for Vandy. It wasn't that long ago where Vandy had a really good recruit in London Humphreys, was promising. It was a good evaluation. And then he went into Georgia as soon as, Georgia was interested. And that was kind of felt like it was your lot in life as the second tier or third tier SEC program. When the bigger school wants somebody, they just go, hey, we're calling you up to the majors, kid, kind of thing.
And maybe that happens with this eventually. Maybe because as you referenced before, like you never know where these kids are going to finish their careers. And I'm not trying to jinx Vanderbilt, but it does also speak to, Bruce, again, this flattening of the curve a little bit in college football. It doesn't take that much of rearranging to where the blue chippers go, and still Ohio State gets more of them. Alabama, Georgia, those schools definitely get more of them. But if they're only signing 8, or let's say they're signing 12 top 100 recruits as opposed to 18, if you take those other 6 and sprinkle them around to different schools, that's significant. That's like pretty significant, because a guy like Curtis, if he does pop and is really, goes on to be a first round draft pick type player, for Vanderbilt to get that player, that's a massive, massive difference, especially if Georgia then is looking for its next quarterback. So again, like the redistribution of talent isn't as drastic. There's still a lot of it clustering at a few schools, but the clustering is a little less, and it doesn't take much to sort of like, okay, now Vandy emerges, now Missouri emerges, now this other school emerges.
I got one that could emerge. So the best quarterback in this class is Keyshawn Henderson. He's a Houston kid who's staying home and going to Houston. Good job by Willie Fritz and family. They, everybody came on this kid. The Elite 11 guys could not stop raving about him, not just talent wise, but character wise and everything. So again, Houston, which was pretty bad last year and got a lot better this year. And we know Willie Fritz knows how to coach. So, maybe he's the, I don't know who would be the guy who would be your centerpiece to turn around a program from, they were a fringe top 25 team this year. Maybe they could be a playoff team if this guy hits the ground running.
Without question. All right, there's your signing day update from Bruce and I. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to hit the mailbag next. All right, let's get into the mailbag. Remember to send all your mailbag questions to audiblepod@gmail.com. I'm now a pro on the show. I know how to get that email address out. First to you, Bruce. What makes a good coach? I think a while back we might have had what makes a great coach. So I think now that it's earlier this summer, you had an interview with Fran Brown, and he seemed like someone who was going to be a rising star in the coaching profession. This year, he's 3-7. Other teams like Tulane, USF, Memphis have coaches who are considered candidates. Well, now they have moved on to other jobs, even though they might have some bad losses on their resume this season. Considering how many firings have already happened, what do you consider as the criteria for what makes a good coach in today's college football landscape? This is Brian. I'll go to you, Bruce. What do you think?
I'm going to go kind of the macro first. The macro for me on this is what makes a good coach is it's relative to what that program has done before, right? If you go in, Alex Golesh did a terrific job because it was I don't know if it was a disaster, but it was a woeful program before he got there, and he fixed it and it's going, right? And so that is a good coach to me. Matt Campbell, I know there's a bunch of people on social media who are like, he's not that good. It's like, they hadn't had many seasons where they won more than 7 games in 120 years of football. He's been there. They, had the best season they've ever had and a bunch of other better seasons they've ever had. Right. So I think John Summerall is a really good coach because he had to replace almost his whole team this year, including his starting quarterback got a lot of money to go to Duke and he beat him. And his best running back went to Oregon. They barely played him, but he still lost him and he had to replace it in their plan for a spot in the playoff. I think that's the macro. The micro part of it, I think it's great if you were a successful coordinator at some other program as an assistant. Sometimes, unless you're Lincoln Riley or a handful of other guys, you're not going to be doing that. You're going to be handing it off to somebody else. So how well do you evaluate players in terms of recruiting, whether it's the portal or high school? That is a big piece. What kind of culture do you create in terms of like how connected are the players? Are you consistent in how you message things? I think that's really important. To me, those are the things. Are you good with the details? Because the details are going to matter. Like if it's like evaluation, messaging, consistency, physicality, and you can be great on one side of the ball. This has been a knock on Lincoln Riley for a while. If it's not fitting well together, you're going to probably be limited. That's why Kirk Ferentz is a really good coach. They play complementary football. You may not love the offense, but they're going to be really good as a team, and they're going to be tough to beat. And I think that factors into it. So to me, it's all those things that are big things. Doesn't mean you can't have a superpower in one other aspect of it. But to me, I don't know if you disagree, Ralph, but that's where I kind of lean into.
No, the only thing I'll add with you is what a good coach is sometimes dictated by where the job is and what the job is. I think a good coach at one place might not be the perfectly good coach or the same good coach at another place, which is the reason why this is also hard to do, right? Which we constantly hammer, like why it's so hard to predict who's going to be successful, because good coach at one spot doesn't always translate to good coach at another spot. What do we got next there, Bruce?
We got one that ties right into that, Ralph. Okay. This is from Barry in Portland. He said Michigan State and Kentucky coaching hires. I was wondering if you guys could comment on the speed at which Kentucky and Michigan State, which by the way fired Jonathan Smith, who fits into the category of really good coach at Oregon State, didn't really get a chance to do too much and didn't look like one in East Lansing. Within days or hours of firing the existing head coach, they had named a replacement. How long did they date the new coach/girlfriend before getting rid of the old one? The Michigan State one in particular seemed a little unusual. What do you think about that?
Well, listen, we're naive, especially now when these moves are made so quickly. We've talked about how this is sped up so much and everybody wants their coach hired before signing day and in late November, early December. Yes. They're talking to these coaches and making some moves behind the scenes and they're vetting. I also would say this, though. Like I think people might be surprised at how little interviewing goes on and how often the interview is happening when decisions are very close to already being made. In other words, there's vetting and we're talking to people. And once we get to the point where we're face-to-face interviewing, a lot of times those schools have already made their decision. And the worst the interview almost becomes more of the negotiation. But there's a lot of work that's done behind the scenes. And I know that you can say, well, that seems tawdry. That doesn't seem fair to the coach that's sitting in the position. But it's not the healthiest process. It really isn't. A lot of these schools are really making moves based on their vetting, their research behind the scenes. They're talking to other people around. They're getting some contact with these coaches. And then it's like, okay, let's talk to them face to face now and have the interview process. Okay, you want to take the job? Yes, great. We want to offer you the job. Good, let's go. Like, it's just, like, if it sounds like it's not the best way to hire somebody, that's because it's not the best way to hire somebody. Even if regardless of whether it works out or not, the process right now is not really the most efficient and thorough way to hire, to make an enormous long-term decision that is also very costly.
I'm just going to throw out one thing to tack on to that. I have a buddy who was involved on a search committee, and we talked about this where it was his school and the guy they had fired. One of the things was a glaring issue, like an on the field thing that just was like, that's bad. That's bad football, And so he's involved in the process. And one of the questions I know he was asking all the candidates was a very specific football thing about like, okay, not how do we prevent that, but this is a scenario. What do you do? And again, I'm not saying they made their decision entirely based on that, but a lot of times that's the stuff that kind of fits in. It's very specific into that. Sometimes there's a search committee involved that does a little the advanced intel, but it is a very like one size does not fit all at this because they're all different personality types, and it's just kind of nutty how that goes.
Okay, last one here. It's a BYU question, BYU at large. We'll start with you, Bruce. Hey guys, love the pod. Of course you do. I listen loyally from across the pond in England. We are so international. It seems obvious that the thing keeping one loss BYU just outside the CFP cut line is their blowout loss to Texas Tech. Yep, no doubt. Strength of record, strength of schedule, defensive, offensive rankings, overall record, BYU compares favorably to many teams inside the cut line. Would a loss to a top 4 team on the road really be a deal breaker? So my question is, how would the view of BYU change if they go to the Big 12 championship game and lose a nail biter this week? Could that possibly change the committee's view and maybe even though they lose that game, still actually affect their ranking positively? Bruce, what do you think from John and London? In London, excuse me.
As what I think on this is my impression of how the committee will handle it, not what I think. I think if they lose a close game, I think that they are going to be dinged for losing again to the same team, whether it was close or a blowout. Honestly, if you're the committee, this is my thought, they won't do this. If you're the committee and you got this Notre Dame Miami thing hanging over you and you just like, you can't win because you're going to look like morons if you take the team that beat the other one head to head.
Yeah.
But you're going to look like hypocrites because you would have flipped what you did a month and a half ago. One solution to avoid that would be, hey, you know what? BYU's good. They were a one-loss team going into this in a Power 4 conference. They have a solid resume. They're good on both sides of the ball. Let's put them in ahead of both those teams. Yeah. They won't do it, but I mean, that would probably, if you're a Miami fan, I think you have a harder leg to stand on because now you're not pointing at Notre Dame. And if you're a Notre Dame fan, I think it sucks, but you don't play in conference championship games.
Right.
So I don't think they're going to do that. But I think that could be a sensible workaround if the committee was going to go in that direction.
So I'll quickly reference back in 2014 with the TCU Baylor debate, and all of a sudden it was like, oh, forget both of those teams. Let's just take Ohio State. Now, Ohio State won 55-0 in the Big Ten championship game and was clearly a team on the rise. But there was, in fact, I remember Barry Alvarez, who was on the committee at the time, kind of said that, we got kind of this bind with TCU and Baylor, and all of a sudden Ohio State.
Wasn't Barry Alvarez? But wasn't it his Wisconsin team that got slaughtered?
Yes.
He was the AD. It was like,
yeah. But I would also say it was a good option because Ohio State was better than both of those teams, but it was a little bit of that, boy, we have this issue with TCU and Baylor. It would be great if we had a different option here. Oh, we have another option. Here's Ohio State. And I don't know if the committee would get there with a Texas Tech loss, though. It could get there with a Texas Tech win because now all of a sudden you got to figure out, with a BYU loss. It could get there with a BYU win because now you got to get both Texas Tech and BYU in there. And who's the most likely to be dumped? Probably Miami, again, probably Notre Dame, and you just get rid of that question altogether. I will say this, though, on BYU, and I know BYU fans don't want to hear this, and I do think that BYU has been undervalued. They're probably better than they were last year, or at least their resume is. It really is tough when you start looking at their body of work and say the one time they had a chance to sort of prove themselves on the field with a playoff caliber team, it looked really bad. They did not look like a team that could compete with the best.
What if they lose in overtime? What happens if they lose in overtime?
No, right. No, so I agree. If you flip that narrative, it has to create another question for the selection committee. I think if you do what you're saying, go to overtime, play a super close game. Now you really do need to get, but I think where we are now and why BYU is outside the cut line is very much because we saw them play a playoff team. They did not look like a playoff team.
Fair enough. Ralph, I'm going to vote for Brian to get our Trader Joe's $12 gift card. Brian, send your... Well, I shouldn't be speaking for you, Ralph. I know you got to get out the door in a minute. So
No. But I also, yes, you know what? We're going to go with Brian too, because again, I don't want to fight you on this.
Stu at Stuart M at The Athletic. Is that his email?
It's not.
Okay.
It is not.
It's not. Okay.
But yeah, you can email us at audiblepod@gmail.com. If you want to get another question, is Brian, please audible us. Please email us and your address so we can get you the $12 Trader Joe's gift card. I think we did a good job without Stu today, Bruce. That's our show for today. Don't forget, every episode is on YouTube now at Audible Show. We will have a live show on Sunday reacting to the selection committee, to Selection Sunday, like literally real time. You'll see Bruce, Stu, and me together in a studio arguing about the selections. Join us at 9 a.m. Pacific time, 12 p.m. Eastern time on Sunday. And you know what? Enjoy championship weekend. Bye, everyone.